Harley-Davidson can outrank BMW and Ducati on this list. Not because it's a better motorcycle, because it's a better thing to own. Every year, riders chase the bike that wins the spec sheet, then spend years finding out the spec sheet never mattered as much as they thought. We graded 15 motorcycle brands into 6 tiers, avoid to buy with confidence, using nothing but ownership reality. By the end, Ducati and KTM owners are going to want to argue with us. Here's one fact to hold on to before we start. The Zero DSRX costs $22,995 and eliminates oil changes completely. The Suzuki V-Strom 650 costs less than half that and hasn't meaningfully changed in years. On a spec sheet, Zero wins that comparison easily. In an ownership garage 3 years from now, it's not close, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why. This isn't a which bike is best ranking. It's a which bike will still make sense later ranking. 6 tiers, 15 brands. Let's start at the bottom. Quick heads up before we start grading. This is a long one, and it's worth the full watch because every tier changes what the next one means. If you're the kind of rider who'd rather know this before you buy than after, go ahead and subscribe now. This channel exists for exactly this kind of breakdown. Setting the rules. One rule before we start grading. A bike landing in a lower tier here doesn't mean it's a bad motorcycle to ride. Several bikes in our bottom tiers are genuinely excellent on a Saturday morning canyon road. What separates the tiers isn't Saturday morning, it's the Tuesday afternoon 3 years from now when something needs a part, a service, or a buyer. Keep that distinction close. It's the entire spine of this video. F tier. Avoid. Most riders are better off choosing something else. That's the textbook definition of F tier. Here, it means something a little more specific. Not this bike is junk, but the ownership case for this bike still has to be proven, and right now it hasn't been. 3 brands land here, and each one gets there for a completely different reason. None of them are here because they're bad motorcycles to ride. Watch closely because the reason each one lands in F tier is never the same reason twice, and that pattern is going to repeat itself the entire rest of this video. Zero DSRX. What if the smartest looking purchase on this entire list is also the riskiest one? The Zero DSRX starts at $22,995 and genuinely erases an entire category of ownership stress. No oil changes, no valve adjustments, no exhaust to rust out. On paper, that's the dream. Here's the catch nobody budgets for. Gas bikes fail in predictable, well-understood ways. Electric bikes fail in ways the used market hasn't figured out how to price yet. A 3-year-old Zero doesn't just carry mileage, it carries an unanswered question about how much life is left in that battery pack, and nobody has a clean answer to give a buyer. Add range anxiety and thin charging infrastructure, and you get a bike that solves one ownership problem by creating 3 new ones. Electric doesn't automatically mean cheap to own. It just means a different kind of unknown. CFMOTO 450SS and 800 NK. Now flip the price tag around completely. The CFMOTO 450SS starts at just $5,699, an enormous amount of motorcycle for the money, and a spec per dollar case that is hard for anyone else on this list to touch. So why F tier? Not because CFMOTO is unreliable. That is not the claim, and it would not be fair. The problem is simpler. There is not enough US ownership history yet to know how parts availability holds up in year 8, or what resale looks like once the new brand excitement wears off. A bike does not have to fail to land in F tier. It just has to be unproven next to brands with 30 years of receipts. KTM, 390 Adventure R, and 790 to 890 family. Here is where it gets uncomfortable, because KTM might outride almost everything else on this list. The 390 Adventure R starts at $7,699, and for riders who actually push a bike hard, off-road, aggressive, demanding, KTM delivers in a way few brands can match. That part is not in question. The 790 and 890 twins sit in a different class entirely, more powerful, more expensive, and with their own separate ownership track record, but they inherit the same brand-level pattern we are about to describe. What is in question is everything after the ride. Dealer dependency and a recurring pattern of owner concerns weigh down the ownership side across the range. Not a claim that KTM engines are bad, not a claim they are guaranteed to fail, just a real gap between how good these bikes are to ride and how confident owners feel about the years afterward. Spec sheet: KTM wins. Ownership confidence: KTM does not. Remember that gap. It is about to show up again almost immediately. D-tier, poor ownership value. Difficult to recommend. Two brands. Neither one is broken. Both are held back by the exact same thing: geography and timing, not the engine, not the ride, not the rider experience. That's an important distinction to hold on to, because up until now, every F-tier entry had a slightly different excuse. D-tier is where the excuse starts repeating itself. Aprilia Tuareg 660. The pattern from KTM just repeated itself, almost word for word. The Tuareg 660's chassis and suspension are praised specifically. This is not a bad bike conversation at all. Reviewers and owners genuinely like what Aprilia built, and on a twisty road, it can arguably outhandle several bikes ranked above it on this list. The problem is entirely off the spec sheet: a thinner US dealer and parts network than Japanese rivals. Not that Aprilia is unreliable, that is off the table. And it would not be an honest read of the evidence. Just a great motorcycle that's harder to keep supported than it should be, in a market where support is half of what this whole video is measuring. Royal Enfield, INT 650, Himalayan 450. Royal Enfield is really two ownership stories wearing one badge. The 650 twins have earned real trust, low cost, honest simplicity, a case a lot of riders genuinely love, and one of the more charming ownership experiences on this entire list when you look at what people actually say about living with them. The Himalayan 450 hasn't earned that yet. It would be dishonest to call it fully proven when it simply hasn't had the years to prove it. Not a strike against the bike, just a limit of how much evidence currently exists. One nameplate, two different levels of evidence, and that split is exactly why the brand lands in D, not higher or lower. C tier, average ownership. Good for the right rider, noticeable trade-offs. This is where the list starts revealing its real thesis. Being an excellent motorcycle and being an excellent thing to own are two completely separate contests. Everything ranked below this tier struggled with evidence or support. Everything in this tier is different. These three brands have plenty of evidence, plenty of dealer support, plenty of proof that the bikes themselves are good. Their trade-off is simpler and, in a way, more honest. They cost more to live with, on purpose, because of what they are. Three brands prove it back to back. Ducati Multistrada V4. Ducati owners report real emotional satisfaction and genuine performance reward. Nobody buys a Ducati and feels nothing. That's not a small thing. It's arguably the entire reason the brand exists. But here's the trade-off. The badge doesn't put on the window sticker. This was never about reliability. Not every Ducati becomes a money pit. That's not the claim, and repeating it wouldn't be fair. The actual issue is cost. Servicing and parts run higher than Japanese alternatives, consistently, and that adds up faster than the showroom moment accounts for. Desire says Ducati. The spreadsheet says something more expensive than Desire budgeted for, and that gap is exactly what the rest of this tier is about to measure again, twice more, from two completely different angles. BMW R1300 GS. This might be one of the best all-around motorcycles on the planet. That's exactly the problem. GS owners report high satisfaction, especially for real touring use. This isn't BMW GS's bad ownership, and GS owners aren't out there regretting the purchase. Nothing here is a knock on the bike itself, but the same complexity that makes the GS so capable is what makes it a bigger, more expensive commitment to maintain. Service and parts cost more than Japanese equivalents. Being the best bike in the world and being the easiest bike in the world to live with are two different titles, decided by two different judges. So far, nothing on this list has won both at the same time. Moto Guzzi V85. Moto Guzzi doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Owners consistently praise character, comfort, and shaft drive. For the right rider, this is a deeply satisfying bike to actually live with, in a way that's hard to put into spec sheet numbers. The limitation is geography, not the motorcycle. Dealer coverage isn't dense enough to call this an easy universal recommendation. Moto Guzzi isn't easy to support everywhere in the US, and it shouldn't be sold that way. But for a rider with access to it, this is one of the more quietly rational picks on the entire list, and it closes out C tier the same way it opened. A genuinely good bike, held back by something that has nothing to do with how it rides. B tier, good ownership, easy to recommend for many riders. 3 brands, and this is where the whole video is about to flip one of its own rules. Indian Scout and Chief. Indian brings real style and real engines to the American cruiser conversation. The Scout specifically is widely liked for accessible power and everyday usability. It's a legitimately strong entry point into American cruiser ownership. Full stop, no caveats needed there. Here's the comparison this entry exists to set up. Indian is not simply a better Harley. That's not the story, and it would be an easy, lazy conclusion to reach. Indian's ecosystem, including dealer count, parts network, and aftermarket depth, is smaller than Harley's. Indian earns its spot on its own merits. It just hasn't caught up to what's coming next, and what's coming next is the biggest twist in this entire tier list. Every single brand so far has followed one uncomfortable rule. The more expensive or exotic the bike, the more it costs you somewhere in the ownership experience. KTM, Aprilia, Ducati, and BMW are brilliant machines with complicated ownership. Indian just reinforced it again. The next bike on this list is one of the most expensive brands in this entire ranking. If the rule holds, it should be one of the hardest to own. It's about to do the opposite, and it's going to force us to rewrite the rule we've been building this whole video around. Before we get to that, if a bike ever looked perfect on paper and turned into a nightmare to actually own, drop the brand below. It might already be on this list. And if you want more breakdowns like this before your next purchase, subscribe. And this channel exists entirely for ownership reality, not showroom hype. Harley-Davidson, here it is. Let's be honest about the downside first, because it's real. Harley is not cheap to own. The cost and the weight are genuine trade-offs, full stop. If we stop the analysis right there, Harley would look exactly like every other expensive brand on this list, including Ducati, BMW, and KTM. Another case of desire outrunning the spreadsheet. But dealer network, parts availability, resale value, and aftermarket support are on a completely different level than almost anything else on this list. This is not Harley as bad ownership, it's the opposite. In America specifically, Harley may be one of the easiest premium motorcycles to actually support, because when something needs a part, a service, or a trade-in, the infrastructure is everywhere. Aprilia and Moto Guzzi wish theirs was, and everywhere KTM riders wish their dealer network went. That's the rule break the mid-body promise was pointing to. Cost and ownership difficulty are not the same variable. They feel like they should move together. Expensive bike, expensive headache. Every brand up to this point has quietly confirmed that assumption. Harley is the first one to prove it isn't automatic. Expensive and easy to support can be the same motorcycle. Keep that exact idea in your back pocket, because Honda is going to take it even further before this video is over. Triumph, Bonneville, Speed Twin 900, Tiger 900. Triumph takes Harley's lesson and applies it from a different angle. The Bonneville family is praised specifically for character and finish, motorcycles that feel special without needing to be exotic. The Tiger 900 GT lands at $15,195, above Japanese pricing, but below most premium adventure competitors, which puts Triumph in a pricing gap almost nobody else on this list occupies. To be fair, Triumph isn't as cheap to own as a Japanese bike. That's not the claim. Service and dealer cost sit above the Japanese Big Four, but you get real emotional payoff without the full exotic bike ownership penalty you'd pay with a Ducati or a KTM. It's the balanced middle. This list has been circling since the start, proof that you don't have to choose between boring and cheap and exciting and expensive. There's a lane in between, and Triumph has been quietly occupying it this whole time. A tier, excellent ownership with only minor compromises. 3 brands. And notice what's different about all 3 before we even name them. None of them are trying to be exotic, and every one of them is easier to justify financially than almost anything ranked below them. If B tier was about proving that expensive doesn't automatically mean difficult, A tier is about to prove the reverse, that inexpensive and unglamorous doesn't automatically mean second best. Kawasaki KLR 650 versus 650 and Ninja 650. What if boring was never an insult? What if it was the entire point? The KLR 650 starts at $6,999 without ABS, $7,299 with ABS. The Versys 650 LT ABS runs $10,399. Kawasaki isn't winning a beauty contest, and it's not pretending to be premium. Nobody buys a KLR because it turns heads in a parking lot. The pitch is durability, simplicity, and low-cost ownership across the board. KLR owners specifically value how simple these bikes are to keep running. The Versys is an underappreciated long-term touring option, and the Ninja Z650 family is about as low drama as motorcycling gets. Compare that to almost anything in F tier or D tier. None of those brands had a durability and simplicity argument this straightforward. Kawasaki isn't trying to win the showroom. It's trying to still be the easiest bike in your garage 5 years from now, and unlike half of this list, it isn't asking you to trade anything major to get there. Yamaha MT-07 Tenere 700. Here's a combination that's shown up exactly 0 times on this list so far. A bike that's genuinely exciting to ride and genuinely easy to justify owning at the same time. Go back through everything we've covered. KTM was exciting, but ownership confidence took the hit. Ducati was exciting, but cost took the hit. BMW was capable, but complexity took the hit. Every single brand until this point has been trading one column of the ownership spreadsheet away to win another one. Yamaha is one of the only brands on this entire list that refuses to make that trade. The MT-07 starts at $8,599 plus destination, and owners consistently praise the value, the torque, the simplicity, the fun per dollar. People don't just tolerate this bike, they genuinely love riding it. The Tenere 700 starts at $10,999 plus destination and delivers relative mechanical simplicity next to premium adventure rivals that cost significantly more. To be fair, the Tenere 700 isn't flawless, and Yamaha isn't a perfect record brand. There are budget components and recall caveats worth knowing before you buy. This isn't a spotless story, and it shouldn't be sold as one. But stack every category together: excitement, value, reliability, confidence, resale, and support, and Yamaha combines all 5 better than almost anyone else here. That's the rarest combination on this entire tier list, and it's exactly why Yamaha earns its place in A tier, instead of getting stuck 1 tier lower like everything that came before it. Suzuki V-Strom 650 and GSX 8S. Ask yourself something. When's the last time "hasn't changed much in years" was actually a compliment? For Suzuki, it is. The V-Strom 650 starts at $9,299, and its entire reputation is built on being dependable and practical over the long haul. It's not new, it's not flashy, and owners specifically accept its age because that maturity is exactly what lowers the risk. Think about what that actually means. Every unknown that made Zero risky, every not enough evidence yet that held back CFMOTO, every dealer network gap that held back Aprilia and Moto Guzzi, and the V-Strom has none of those problems, precisely because it's been sitting in driveways, largely unchanged, for years. Boring isn't a compromise here. Boring is the entire resume. The GSX 8S starts at $9,249 and proves Suzuki isn't only coasting on old platforms, there's real modern value here too. So this isn't a brand frozen in the past. It's a brand that knows exactly which parts of its lineup don't need reinventing. To be clear, the V-Strom 650 isn't the best adventure bike. That's a different contest, and Suzuki isn't trying to win it. Suzuki wins the ownership argument specifically. Less exciting image, more practical, more proven, cheaper to live with than flashier rivals. If this entire video has one thesis hiding inside a single brand, it's this one, and it's the second to last stop before we find out which brand does it even better. One tier left. Before we get to it, if this video has already changed how you're thinking about your next bike, that's exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe now because the next brand is the one this entire ranking has been building toward. S tier, exceptional ownership. Buy with confidence. One brand earns this on its own. Honda NC75DX, Rebel 500, Goldwing, Africa Twin. If you've been waiting for the most exciting motorcycle on this list, we need to reset expectations right now. It's not coming. And that's exactly the point. Let's be precise about what this is and isn't. This isn't Honda never breaks, and it isn't Honda is recall-free. Neither of those is an accurate claim, and neither is the argument here. The argument is total ownership confidence across an entire lineup, not a perfect record on any single bike. Look at the range, because this is the part that separates Honda from every other brand we've covered tonight. KTM was excellent for one type of rider. Ducati was excellent for one type of rider. BMW, Triumph, Harley, every brand on this list, no matter how high it climbed, was still fundamentally a specialist. Honda isn't. The Rebel 500 and NC75DX deliver low-drama ownership with strong parts availability and dealer support for commuters and beginners. The Africa Twin starts at around $15,199, giving Honda a credible ADVI comparison against BMW, Ducati, KTM, and Triumph, without the ownership complexity any of those three carry. And the Goldwing starts at $25,500, proving Honda doesn't only win the budget conversation, it wins premium touring ownership too, with owners who often treat it as a long-term platform rather than a short-term purchase. Honda doesn't dominate a single spec sheet on this list. It's less emotional than Ducati, less capable off-road than KTM at the extreme, less prestigious than BMW, less charming than Royal Enfield, less characterful than Moto Guzzi. If you ranked every brand here purely on which one gets your pulse up in a parking lot, Honda might not win a single matchup against any of them. But this video was never about the parking lot. It's about the service counter, the parts department, the resale conversation, years 2, 5, and 10. Go all the way back to the very first bike we covered. Zero solved one ownership problem and created 3 new ones. Honda doesn't solve one problem. It simply never creates most of them in the first place across 4 completely different kinds of riders. Across commuters, beginners, tourers, and ADV riders, nothing else on this list carries less total ownership risk, less emotional than almost every rival here. Still the smartest ownership decision on the entire list. The motorcycle you want and the motorcycle you should own are frequently 2 different machines. Most riders still shop with their pulse, horsepower, prestige, the exhaust note bouncing off a parking garage. But ownership was never decided in the showroom. It is decided 18 months later at a service counter or at a dealership when you are trying to sell the thing. Change the question you are asking and the whole map changes with it. Stop asking which bike is coolest and start asking which bike will still make sense after the excitement wears off. Sometimes that answer is thrilling. Sometimes it breaks every rule you thought you understood about price and difficulty. And sometimes it is just refreshingly boring. Because boring, it turns out, might be the smartest word in this entire industry. The best motorcycle was never the one that wins the test ride. It is the one that is still worth owning long after the test ride is a memory. Which tier is your current bike sitting in? If this list changed how you will shop for the next one, subscribe. This channel is built to keep you out of the F tier.